Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm James, continuing on with my build of this Aeromite RC plane. So this is the second part of the servo installation. I was trying to get all the servos installed in my last video in this build series, but I only made it to getting the aileron servo installed. I kind of ran out of time for a few reasons. Check out that video if you're interested. But in this video, we're going to go ahead and move on and finish up installing the servos in the fuselage. And as I like to mention in the introduction to each of the videos of this build series, the Aeromite is not a plane that you can buy in a kit form. You have to build it off a set of plans like I'm shown here hanging on the wall. If you want to get a set of those plans, check out the introduction video of this build series, and I go over a few different ways on how you can obtain one. And for the servos, I'll mention it again, I'm using these high-tech HS81 analog micro servos. So to start with, let's take a look at the plans again, and then we'll jump into installing the servos. Okay, so here's the plan. And my voice gets a little weird when I get close to the wall like this. I think there's sort of an echo or something, so forgive me for that. But in any case, here are the servos. They're mounted up inside of the fuselage toward the back of the wing, above the wing, as you can see here. There's 3 of them. Again, those are going to be the throttle, the rudder, and the elevator. Now in the plan, or on the plan, they show a couple things that I'm not going to do. One of them is they do recommend, or they do have a birch dowel, 3/16" diameter birch dowel that you'll be using for your push rod. It's a simple setup. It actually works pretty well if you've ever done that. You just basically take a wood dowel and you take the wire, you kind of put a little 9-degree angle into it, you drill a little hole, you insert that wire into that little hole, and then you wrap it with something like, you can wrap it with wire, then put epoxy around it. You can put, sometimes you can use like electrical shrink tubing, heat shrink tubing, that works as well. You know, for smaller planes, stuff like that works. But as I mentioned in my previous video about the servos when I did them on the wing, is that I'm going to be using this control rod set from Sullivan. So we'll pull this out in just a minute, but yeah, going to be using that. And then the other thing that they mentioned here in the plans is that for the rudder, they use cables. Again, I'm not going to be using cables. I'm going to be using the push rod hardware. And then for the throttle, it's just going to be a short run over to the engine. And then I'll quickly go over the hardware again. I'm using half-A size control horns, as you can see here from Dubrow. I will have some nylon or plastic clevises and a couple threaded rods to screw those into the control rods. The control rod set, again, is from Sullivan. It is their goldenrod brand or part that was actually pretty common back in the day, but I don't know how easy it is to get these anymore. But there are other options out there for control rods. But check out Sullivan's website. You still may be able to purchase some of these sets. Again, this set is the number 503, and they're all color coded. This is a 3-foot section, and they make bigger ones and larger diameters. This one I think is a 256 size. Okay, let's go ahead and pull this out. We'll take a look at it. First thing we have is the rods themselves. There's an inner rod and then an outer rod or sleeve, and these just insert, the yellow inserts into the red like so. Get that guy in there. Kind of hard to show the whole thing. It's a 3-foot section, so I'm not going to be using all of that, but you know, so basically there it goes like this. We'll have to cut that to fit. And then what else is in? Of course, they give you a little set of instructions here on how to put it together or how to use it. Let me go ahead and just get this side open. It's a long way to go all the way to the bottom of this bag, so let's go ahead and cut this off here. I'm probably not going to use all of the hardware that comes with it. Put some of it in my scrap box. Let's go ahead and just pour this out onto the table here. They give you a few little things in here you have to keep track of. So they give you 4 of these threaded rods, which screws into the control rod, and the other side screws into the clevis, or the clevis screws onto it. And then they also give these little retaining clips that you insert over the clevis to kind of hold it on. And then they also give you this little kind of grommet material, and you can cut this into little rings, and then basically if you have a hole going through like a bulkhead or something, you would just sandwich it. You'd put one ring on one side and one ring on the other side and kind of squeeze them together, and that'll help secure it. Or you can glue it into place. This is a pretty small run and a pretty small plane, so I'm not going to probably worry about that. I'm just going to epoxy the outer control rod tubing to the fuselage itself. And then to connect to the servos, I have some, again, sort of the same thing, but these are just going to be nylon or plastic with the little threaded rods. So that's going to be the system I use. I may change these out. If I have some plastic ones, well, I guess I can use these. A little bit on the big side for this plane, but that's okay. And then one thing I did in an earlier step before I covered the plane is I actually located the exit holes for the two control rods on the fuselage, and I just made sort of smaller channels for them just so that I can find them after I got the plane covered. So I have one on this side. Oops, I have one on this side here, and then there's one, let me see where it is, right back here. So what I'll do, I'll have to clean these out. I have to cut this open like that, and then again the control rod will slide in there. I don't know if it's big enough yet. Let's see if I can get it in there. Yeah, it's a little on the small side. I didn't measure it when I did it, so I'll just make these a little wider and like a little channel, and then we can slide the control rod in. So the thing that I like to do is install the control rods first, and then once those are installed, that'll tell you where to install your control horns. You know, if they're coming out at a certain angle, maybe this way or that way or something, you want to keep them, you know, close. But if you do that first, you'll kind of know where they're going to land, and then it makes it easier. Also, same thing for the servo. Now, you probably can't see under here, but below this little block here that we installed to hold the wing on, there's a little opening in this bulkhead where the two control rods are going to come out and engage the servos. And then again, the servos are going to be down inside here. And then to hold the servos, I'm going to just be doing, this is a hardwood, piece of hardwood stock. I don't know, this is probably 1/4 inch by 3/8 or something. I'm just going to cut a couple rails out of this, and then these are just going to be, flip it around, installed down in here, and that's what the servos are going to screw into. And then on the sides, I'm just going to take some stock material like this, and I'm going to cut out sort of like a small piece, maybe a 1/2 inch or 1 inch wide piece, and then I'm just going to notch it on both, kind of on both sides like this, and slide that up just below them, just to help hold these rails in place a little better. And again, here is the Hi-Tech HS81 micro analog servo, and they're going to pop right down inside there. I'll do 3 across. Now I realize this looks a little rough here, but what I'm going to do is once I get the control rod installed and everything set up, I'll go over this, and I'm probably going to put a piece of monocoat over this to kind of cover it up. So it'll just be a monocoat patch over this, so you'll just see the very end of the control rod coming out, but it's not too bad. But in any case, so that's going to go in there like this, and I'll quickly do the other side. It's also helpful when you do this if you roll up a nice little tight tube of sandpaper and you kind of work it in there, and especially on the inside of this one, because the control rod's coming through and there's that edge on the inside, so it's nice to sort of like groove it out, you know what I mean, on the inside, on this side, sort of like it's grooved out on this side, on the outside, so that the control rod kind of goes through a little smoother. So I like to get a little piece of fine sandpaper like this, roll it up, and then just kind of work it. Okay, so now I can go ahead and slide the control rods through, and I'm not going to cut them just yet. So what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to use the inner rod because it's a little skinnier and a little more flexible, and I'm going to use this one to sort of fish it through to the right location. It's going to be a little trial and error to sort of get it to go all the way through and come out in the right spot over here. But once I get this in, then I can just slide the outer tube over that one, and then once I do that, I can kind of maybe take it back out, just check it, and then just go ahead and cut it to the right length. Okay, so I have the first one fished through. Now let me get the other one in there. All right, there's the other one. All right, so both of the inner rods are now installed to be used as guides. And one thing I did want to point out is that a lot of times what you'll do is you'll have them cross over each other so you have a better sort of straight shot in the movement between the servo and the control surface. So for example, let's say I hooked up my control horn on my elevator over here. I would put my elevator servo over here, and then same thing, I'd have my rudder servo over here, and it would go over to my rudder control horn over here, and they're basically crossing over each other inside of the fuselage. But it's kind of like a better straight shot of motion, if you will, between the servo and the control surfaces. You know, depending on the plane, sometimes it's more important than other times. But if you did have, like for example, your elevator servo here and the elevator control horn connected over here, then you may have a chance, again depending on the plane, it may be sort of harder for it to kind of make that bend straight through. Anyhow, I hope that makes sense. It's not always the case, but sometimes it's useful to do that, just to cross them over, or you can go straight through depending on your situation, but something to keep in mind. So now I can easily slide the outer rod over the inner rod. Let me go ahead and get this one set, and then I'll give them a rough sort of measurement, and then I'll cut them to the right size. I'm going to cut them long just so that I have room to work with. There it goes. Okay, there's the first one. I'm going to try this one from this side because I just tried it going this way and it still was getting sort of snagged on there. So let me go ahead and put it through here. See if that's better. There it goes. And then for this, I'm just going to go ahead and kind of estimate where I think it should be. I can always cut it back if I need to later, but I'm just going to probably pull these through to, as you see this one right here. Get this other one through. Okay, somewhere right about there. I can always trim them later. And now that the outer rods are now inserted, I can pull the inner rods out. And these are actually in here pretty nice. They're nice and stiff in there. So I will put a little bit of epoxy on here and also on inside up over here, but I think they're going to be just fine. And now I'm going to go ahead and trim it in here as well. And again, I'm going to start it. I'm just going to go ahead and trim it. I know it's going to be a little bit too long, but I'm just going to trim it right about here. Actually, I'm going to go right about here. I think that's going to be okay. There. And there. And now I'll use a little bit of 5-minute epoxy, and I'm just going to put some, I'll dab some inside here on both sides, and it'll drip down into there and it will hold it nice and securely. Well, we'll let this cure and then come back and continue on. All right, while this is curing, let's go ahead and take a look at our control horns. I think I am going to start with the control horns. Let's pull this out again. These are the Debro. Pretty simple setup. You have the control horn here. You have this little retainer on the other side, almost like a, well, it's like a little plate, a little nylon plate, and the screws just go straight through. So we'll just drill out the control surface once we get them lined up. And let's go ahead and take a look and see what we have in the bag here. Get on out. There we go. So there are the 4 little screws. Put this in our little cup here. And then we have just the control horns themselves. We'll cut these off of here. I just pull them off with my fingers, but a little bit cleaner this way. All right, there we go. So the way I like to assure I have the control horn in the right location is I start with actually assembling the inner control rod with the threaded rod here. I'll attach the clevis to that, and then we'll go ahead and fish that through, and then we'll know exactly where it lines up and where to place the control horn. So we'll start with this guy. Probably have to use some pliers for this because it's kind of skinny. And I like to screw these in probably close to halfway. This way you have a little bit of room to screw them out if you have to, kind of make a little bit of adjustment here or there. Plus you want to make sure that they're deep enough inside. You don't want to have it just on the outer kind of tip of that, because that could just snap off. So you want to get it in there a good ways, at least a third. All right, that's good enough. And then we'll take one of our one of our clevises, throw this dude on here. Now once you get this set in the right location, I think you can solder these if you wanted to, but I'm just going to put some Loctite or something on those. And really, they really can't go anywhere because it's going to be attached to the control rod, so they can't kind of unthread, if you will. They can't come loose. So in any case, we'll put that again right about there. That'll give us some room to work with. And now we can go ahead and fish it through. Somewhere right about there. Let me do the other one now. Now I can already tell that I'm going to have to cut these rods back a little further because the clevis may get too close to that there. Probably going to be close, but I'm going to go ahead and trim off probably about a ½ inch or so. And now we can go ahead and slide these guys back in, and I think I'll have enough room now to work with it. This one will be like right about here, like this. And here's the other one. Somewhere about there. And you know, there is some flexibility in them, so that's good. You know, if it's a little bit out like this or a little bit in, it's not going to be a big deal. I may have to put a little bit of a tweak in the elevator one in order for it to reach down to the control horn. I may have to put a little bit of a bend in it. No big deal. Okay, so now we go ahead and install the control horns. Now the thing you want to do with these is that you always want to line up the holes on the control horn, the little holes. You want to line those up along the axis of the hinge line, or basically the hinge line. You don't want them to be too far back or too far forward. You want them to be somewhere like this or so. So they're right in line with the hinge line. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the rudder. So I'm just going to go ahead and install one of these guys on here. Like so. And now I can easily just move it to where it needs to go and mark it somewhere about there. So this looks about right, and I'm just going to carefully hold it, and I'm just going to poke it. One there, one there. So now I'll grab the 2 screws and the little plate, I call that a back plate, and we'll attach the control horn using those. But the first thing I need to do is just drill out those little holes to the same diameter of the screws here. And then in order to do that, I'll just use my little pin vise here. Boy, it's a little tough because I think I have that, well, that hinge is right there, that little CA hinge, so it's going to be a little tougher to get it through. It's actually pretty good because that'll give more support to it. Poke this side here. So I checked the screws and they're a little bit big still. So I got a little bit bigger drill bit and we'll kind of ream these out a little bit here. That should be okay. Kind of hard to see with my fat, ugly fingers in the way. That should be okay because I can probably screw that through. All right, let me go ahead and get a screwdriver. Okay, this may be a little cumbersome just because it's hard to, again, with my fingers in the way. I'll try to show as much as I can. I'm going to try to just go ahead and use some tweezers. Get these guys in here. There's one there. Probably going to have to screw those into the wood, I think. Now the thing about it is you don't want to go all the way through the wood, just so the tip is flush with this side, and then you put the little nylon plate on. Put them all the way through, then it may be hard to get them to kind of put the plate to come down evenly on it without a little bit of trouble. So we'll see how it goes. These are flathead screws, which make it a little bit harder, as the screwdriver will slide out. That's going okay. And let's see over here now. Okay, they're popping through there. And now we'll get our little plate. And then for this, you basically just have to press it on. And there's no threads in the little plate there. The threads will be created as you screw it in. So you just have to kind of hold it tight, kind of push it and turn it. Get it to catch. Now do get one started and get the other one going. You don't want to tighten one all the way down because sometimes it kind of bends or tweaks a little bit and then you won't be able to get it lined up on the other one. And then you'll take it back out and have to do it again. Kind of play with it back and forth, but okay. Getting there. Of course, you don't want to over tighten this. You don't want to crush the wood. Kind of get it to just press into it a little bit. Stuff is pretty strong. Something like that right there. That side. Then, there we go. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and do the elevator next, and we'll come back and we'll move on to the servos. Okay, well there we have it. Got the rudder and the elevator. And then we'll go ahead and flip it over here. You can kind of see how those the screws are sticking out above it there. Oops, let me move it over here. See how those are sticking out? If you don't like the look of that, you can just get yourself some cutters and just chop those down a little bit. Little roto tool or something like that. And you kind of get rid of those. If you don't like the way that looks, I'll probably trim those down a little bit. All right, so now we can go ahead and move on to the servos. So before I move on to the servo installation, I just engaged these control horns back here so that I can move these kind of out of the way. And then here's where the servos are going to be. And again, I have 3 of these little micro servos from High Tech. The thing about it is I was looking at them and I think it may be a little tight in here to get all 3 of them in here across and have room for them to be able to rotate and such. So it may be that I have to move one. I was thinking the throttle, obviously, I may move the throttle up into this area over here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and set it up for to hold all 3, and if I don't have enough room, I'll just move one over here for the throttle. So to start with, I'm just going to cut 2, I call them rails, mounting rails for the servos, out of this hardwood piece I have. I'm going to cut 2 to go in here, like one about here somewhere, and then one here. You know, they're going to be down in there, and those will be what the servos mount to. So let me get those cut, and we'll try to fit them in here. Now I do have a doubler on the lower part of the fuselage here where the saddle is for the wing. So the mounting area for the rails is going to be actually wider than it is out here. So I'm just going to go ahead and estimate where that will be using approximately where I see the doubler here. And I'll cut them a little bit longer than I need to, just so I don't cut them too short, and then I can always sand them. So probably right about here is where I'll cut it, and try that one right about there. Well, because of the small area and sort of working down inside there, it's not easy to really video that, but I think you get the picture here. I moved the one rail up against this bulkhead. This one is over here. They're not glued in yet. This is just a test fit. And what I'm going to do is I'll now make measurements and just sort of make sure they're sort of straight and true inside there. And then we'll glue them on with the with some epoxy. And then again, I'll reinforce them with, I'll cut some sheet material like this, and I'll just notch it like I mentioned before, and I'll just go ahead and I'll reinforce it where it connects to the fuselage there, just to add a little bit more strength to it. But I think this is a good location where these are, and I'll test it with 3 servos to see if I can get them to fit properly, and if not, I'll just move the throttle up to here like I mentioned just a few minutes ago. Okay, so I made some measurements. I measured down from the top to make sure they were equal on both sides, and also from the bottom. And I think I have it located where I want it to be. And then I can move, for example, one of these control rods in, and you kind of see it's at the right level. So I think this is going to be good. Okay, so now I'm going to mark the locations of the beams, and then I'll take them out, and then we'll glue them in with some 5-minute epoxy, and then we'll come back and we'll add our reinforcement to the sides. And now we'll let this cure and then come back and add our reinforcement. Well, our epoxy has now cured, and now I can add my reinforcement sheet. So I'm just going to measure approximately a little beyond here, and I'll cut a couple small pieces. So somewhere right around there will be good. And I'll just go ahead and eyeball this. It doesn't have to be perfect. Somewhere right around there. And now I'm just going to go ahead and mark it from the bottom of this doubler, which is like right there, to the top of the mounting rails. It's going to be kind of hard to see, but somewhere like right about here. Like so. And then I know that I have to go a little bit deeper. Those are about those are about a quarter of an inch thick. So I'll just add about maybe, I don't know, I'll probably add about 3/8 onto that mark. Maybe somewhere right around there. That. And then measuring the total depth, I guess I'll call it. Looks like it's about an inch. So I'll just mark that on this side now. That. And we'll connect the dots right about there. Cut one more for the other side. Oops. A little extra trimming on that, oh well. And we can go ahead and straighten these out a little bit with a little bit of sanding. And now I'll just go ahead and mark my little spots here. And I'll just go ahead and measure out the notches. Again, I went about 1/8 below my piece in there, which I think is about a quarter of an inch thick total. So I have about 3/8 of an inch total here. Somewhere like that. And then again, this one over here. That. Well, it looks like I'm a little bit thin on this side. I don't know why that is. I marked it. Oh well. Let's go ahead and trim it a little bit. All right, after a little bit of fine trimming, I think I got this good to go here. It's going to go snap right into there like that. So let me go ahead and cut the other one. And as I like to do when I'm mounting things like this, like, you know, servo mounting rails, or obviously the engine mounts and stuff, I always want to use an epoxy. I think that's the best way. Thick CA is pretty strong and can use it in a lot of applications, but I like to use epoxy for things like this. Again, this is just my JB Weld 5-minute. It's great stuff. Probably got way more than I need. And we'll go ahead and do our first side with the X on it. You know what's kind of funny with this kind of thing is that if you ever have a crash, which I've had my share of crashes, you pick up the pieces and things like this will be still together. You know, they'll survive the crash. The rest of the plane is completely gone, obliterated. It's all broken off. All these little joints where you have your epoxy and such are all stuck together still. So it's kind of funny to think that, you know, you're holding everything together, but it only does so much. Okay, so my hand's going to be in the way, but I'm just going to go ahead and pop it in. Like that. There's that one. And once I get this other one in, I'll go back and I'll put some epoxy sort of in those little seams Excuse my hand. There we go. Okay, those are in now. And I'll just take a little bit of my extra epoxy and just sort of smear it along sort of the seams or the contact. Again, excuse my hand here. And I can guarantee you those servos will go nowhere unless the plane completely obliterates in a crash. Then what I'll find is the servos attached to this whole piece will be like intact, laying somewhere in the weeds. This little side here, I'm going to try to push down a little more. There we go. All right, so let's go ahead and let this cure, and we'll come back and install our servos. Okay, well, my reinforcement pieces have now cured, and this is nice and strong. So now what I'll do is I will now do a test run with 3 of the servos to see how they fit in there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull off this piece here, and I'm just going to put on a single. I'm going to use these guys here. I'm going to clip off one side, and I'll just have one for each servo like that so they don't get in the way of each other. And then I'll go ahead and put them in here, and we'll see how it looks. So I'll just clip these guys off here. That. So my servos aren't centered, but I'm just going to go ahead. I didn't hook them up to the receiver or anything. This is just going to be a test kind of run. So this will be my throttle servo. It'll go right down here, something like that. And I will have to trim off, I think, the end of that one. And then I'm going to have my, whatever this one is, I think this is going to be my rudder. It's not really that important right now, but we'll put this one on here. Yeah, that's getting very, very close. The thing about these micro servos is that they're too small to have the center of the, I guess the mechanism coming out kind of on one side. So even if you alternate them, they're not getting that far apart from each other. Yeah, those are right on top of each other. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the throttle servo and move it over here to the front. Okay, I did set up my throttle servo just so I can get the amount of throw on it correct. So it's going to be something like that. So I will set this now inside here to give me enough room so it doesn't hit this little bulkhead here, and then I'll slot it right down the side there. That should work pretty good. And the wire is going to go straight through this way on this side of the plane. All right, since I have my receiver hooked up, I might as well just go ahead and center my elevator and my rudder as well, which I already did. So that's the movement on these two. So to mount this servo, the throttle servo, I can actually use the same material that I used for these other two. The measurements came out just fine. So I'm just going to cut 2 small pieces, one for each side, one for this side and one for that side, and then we'll just put the servo straight down on top of that. And I already measured the width that I think I'm going to use. I'm going to use about probably a 3/4 of an inch piece, and by doing that I'll be able to sort of set the servo, like I just mentioned, a little bit away from that little bulkhead down there so I can get that full movement on there. So let me go ahead and cut 2 pieces from this, and we'll come back and glue them in. Okay, so I have my 2 blocks now, and then I'm going to do the same thing I did over here. Is I'm just going to go ahead and set the servo down in there, and then use that as a way to mark the right location for the tops of the blocks. It's going to be make a little bit of adjustment because I'm going to be measuring from the top of those little tabs down there, and then I just have to drop down from there. It's actually no big deal if it actually goes a little bit higher, so I'll just go ahead and mark it right here. Once again, very close quarters working here, so it's hard to get everything without it. Hands getting in the way and things getting blurry and all that kind of stuff. I don't have super high-tech recording equipment here. So let me pop this guy in. It's going to be messy, but there's my mark down here. Have to watch that. It may slip a little bit, so I'll have to go back and adjust it. Now for this other guy. And being that that's 5-minute epoxy, it'll start to set, so I can just kind of monitor it and then it'll be okay. Okay, while this is curing, we can go ahead and move on to setting up the 2 servos here for the elevator and the rudder. I reconnected the control rods back here onto the control surfaces, so this is where these are all lined up at this point. They're going to have to be trimmed. And then I'm going to push both of these kind of back against the side. I think there's going to be room for them to work with each other. There's going to be room for them to sort of rotate. I checked it with, I'm going to be using these plastic clevises for these guys, and there's enough room. But I am going to go ahead and trim this one down, this control horn on this one, or this arm on this one. I'm going to take off that first hole. This is for the rudder. I don't have to have as much movement, in my opinion, on the rudder and the tail wheel as I do on the elevator. I want to have more flexibility with the movement for the elevator. So this will just give me a little bit more room in between these two guys so they're not buttoned up against each other. So I'm just going to go ahead and trim this one back, and then we'll go ahead and cut these, clip these to the right length. We'll insert our little threaded piece here into the control rod, and then we'll thread on our clevis, and then we'll get everything connected. And you can see here I've already drilled out, sort of opened up that hole a little bit so that it can accommodate the clevis, which is a little bit bigger than that hole. And let me sink this one back in there. So those are set there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to estimate how far to cut the yellow control rod back. Okay, it looks a little funky, but I just taped on my little threaded piece there onto the clevis, because the reason I'm not going to screw it into the clevis now and do this is because it's harder to screw it into the yellow rods when it's on the clevis, because you'll just be spinning that as you try to screw this in as well. So I'm just going to mark it, we're going to cut it, we'll come back, we'll put this, we'll install the threaded rod into the yellow control rod, and then we'll come back and attach the clevis onto that. But for now I just want to measure approximately where I need to make my cuts. So I'm just going to do it like this. Again, you can always cut it if it doesn't fit right, but I'm going to try to do my best to get it done the first time. So probably right about there on this one. Again, I want to go in about 1/3 or so into the control rod with the threaded piece. So again, somewhere right about there, about the same spot actually. These are pretty much lined up together. Okay, so now let's go ahead and clip those dudes. Watch out for my wire. Okay, so I'm kind of jumping around a bit. I think I'm happy now with where these servos are going to be mounted. So I'm just going to go ahead and mark the holes for them. Okay, now I'll drill those out with a little pilot drill with my pin vise, and then we'll come back and screw those in and get those mounted. And now what we like to do is do an initial screw these in and set some threads in there, and then come back, pull them out, and then put some CA to sort of strengthen those threads in the wood. Probably not super critical for for these small servos like this, but it's kind of a common thing to do, especially for the bigger servos, bigger planes. You want to do that, I think. Okay, I'll do that for the other 3, and then we'll come back and put CA on there. And now while the CA sets up, I can go ahead and prepare my servos. I can install the little square rubber grommet, which just plugs into the little tab here. That side on here, and then there's these little brass or metal bushings that plug in below those or into those like that. And then to make it easy to thread in these pieces, I'm going to pull the control rods out and do it out here where I have room to work. Get some pliers, hold on to it, screw these in, put it back in, and I'll do this one. And now I'll screw these clevises on probably about a third of the way again, and then I can always adjust them once we get the servos installed. So I'll have to hang on to this with a pair of pliers. Okay, now I think I can go ahead and install my servos. Screw them in here. Let me pop that dude in. Pop this one in, like so. Get these wires out of the way. Kind of small to get in there with everything, so I'm going to go ahead and set those in with my tweezers. Going. Just until you get that first little squish onto the rubber grommet. Okay, let me go ahead and do this one up here. Okay, now I'll just go ahead and do an initial check. I'll just pop these in where they need to go. Okay, so I have them set up just for a quick little check. Elevator, rudder. Okay, my friends, to save a little bit of time, I installed the throttle servo off camera. Same process. I figured you've probably seen enough of that. But I did hook everything up to the receiver, so we can go ahead and give it a little bit of a test run. Here is the throttle. And of course, here is the elevator and the rudder. All right, well, that was kind of a long video, so thanks for hanging out with me for that. And before I go, I do want to mention that the next step is going to be an exciting one. It is going to be installing the engine, the OS 15LA, and also assembling and installing the tank. And that'll be the next video, or the next step of this build series. Of course, we'll hook up the throttle as well. And yeah, so really, I do see the light at the end of the tunnel on this build. After we get the engine installed, the next step after that will be to finish up just setting the battery and the receiver, kind of get the electronics, you know, established. And that's about it. We'll balance the plane, and then we'll do a maiden flight. So all right, getting close. Okay, so thanks as always for watching my channel. I really appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.